The moment the invitation arrived, Claire's heart sank into her stomach, a cold weight that made her breath catch. It was elegant, cream-colored with gold lettering, the kind of wedding invite that screamed money and pride. Her ex-fiancé, Michael, was getting married to her former best friend, Lila. The betrayal still stung, sharp as a blade, even after 2 years. But what gutted her most was the handwritten note tucked inside. "Claire, we'd love for you to be there. Bring a date." The audacity of it burned. She crumpled the note, tossing it into the trash, but the invitation sat on her counter for days, taunting her. She wasn't going alone. No way. But who could she ask? That's when her mind drifted to Ethan, the single dad from her apartment complex, whose quiet kindness had been her lifeline through the darkest days of her breakup. Claire, 32, was a graphic designer who worked from her small, sunlit apartment in Portland. She was fiercely independent, with a quick laugh and a tendency to hide her pain behind sarcasm. 2 years ago, her world had crumbled when Michael, her fiancé of 5 years, admitted he'd been seeing Lila behind her back. The double betrayal, losing her partner and her best friend, had left her hollow, questioning her worth. She'd thrown herself into work, avoiding relationships, convincing herself she was fine alone. But loneliness had a way of creeping in, especially at night when the silence was loudest. Ethan, 38, lived 2 floors above her. He was a high school history teacher, broad-shouldered with tired hazel eyes and a smile that felt like a warm hug. His wife had passed away 3 years ago, leaving him to raise his 6-year-old daughter, Sophie, alone. Claire had met him one rainy afternoon when Sophie's soccer ball had rolled into her patio. They'd struck up a conversation, and over time, their chance encounters, laundry room chats, shared elevator rides, turned into a quiet friendship. Ethan was steady, grounded, the kind of man who listened deeply and never pushed. He'd been there when Claire needed to vent about Michael, offering coffee and a patient ear. Asking him to be her date to the wedding felt like a leap, but something about his calm presence made her feel safe. She knocked on his door one evening, her palms sweaty, the invitation clutched in her hand. Sophie answered, her pigtails bouncing, and called for her dad. Ethan appeared, dish towel slung over his shoulder, flour dusted on his cheek from baking with Sophie. Claire blurted out her request, her voice shaky. "I know it's weird, but would you be my date to my ex's wedding? I can't face it alone." Ethan's brow furrowed, but his eyes softened. "Claire, I'd be honored," he said, his voice low and sure. Sophie, overhearing, clapped her hands. "Can I come too?" They laughed, and Claire felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wouldn't be a disaster. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind. Claire's first challenge was her own insecurity. Every time she thought about facing Michael and Lila, her stomach churned. She imagined their pitying looks, the whispers from mutual friends who'd chosen sides. She spent hours agonizing over her dress, settling on a deep emerald gown that made her feel bold, though she still worried it wouldn't be enough to mask her nerves. Ethan, meanwhile, faced his own hurdles. He hadn't been to a social event since his wife's death, and the idea of dressing up, mingling, and playing the role of Claire's date stirred up anxiety. He worried about leaving Sophie with a sitter for the night, and his budget was tight. Renting a tux wasn't cheap. But he didn't tell Claire any of this. He wanted to be there for her, the way she'd been there for him when Sophie had a fever and Claire had brought over soup and a stack of coloring books. They decided to prepare together, turning the challenge into something lighter. One evening, Claire came over to Ethan's apartment to practice dancing. Neither wanted to embarrass themselves on the dance floor. Sophie played DJ, giggling as she blasted cheesy pop songs. Ethan was stiff at first, his hands hesitant on Claire's waist, but her laughter loosened him up. "You're not bad for a history nerd," she teased. He grinned, spinning her gently. "And you're not bad for someone who draws cartoons for a living." For a moment, the wedding felt like a distant worry, not a looming threat. But as the day approached, Claire's doubts resurfaced. What was she trying to prove? That she was over Michael? That she could show up looking happy and whole? She confided in Ethan one night over coffee, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to face them." Ethan set his mug down, his gaze steady. "You're not going to prove anything to them, Claire. You're going to show yourself you've moved on. And I'll be right there with you." His words anchored her, but deep down, she wondered if she was dragging him into her mess. The wedding was held at a sprawling vineyard outside the city, string lights twinkling against the dusk. Claire's heart pounded as they arrived, Ethan's hand resting lightly on her back. He looked sharp in his rented tux, his usual scruffy charm polished into something striking. Claire felt a pang of gratitude, and something else, something warmer she wasn't ready to name. Inside, the venue was a sea of familiar faces, some friendly, some not. Michael spotted her first, his smile tight, Lila at his side in a flowing white gown. "Claire, you came," he said, too cheerful. Lila's eyes flicked to Ethan, and Claire caught a flash of surprise. She introduced Ethan, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "This is Ethan, my date." He shook Michael's hand with a calm strength that made Claire stand taller. The evening unfolded in a blur of toasts, laughter, and clinking glasses. Claire braced herself for pain, but being next to Ethan made it bearable. He was attentive, cracking quiet jokes to ease her tension, fetching her a drink when her hands shook. During the couple's first dance, Claire felt a lump in her throat, but Ethan leaned close, whispering, "You're doing great." His presence was a shield, and for the first time, she felt like she wasn't defined by her past. Then came the moment that changed everything. As the night wound down, Claire stepped outside for air, Ethan at her side. They sat on a bench overlooking the vineyard, the air cool and fragrant. Claire thanked him, her voice thick. "I couldn't have done this without you." Ethan was quiet for a moment, then said, "There's something I need to tell you." His tone was serious, and Claire's heart skipped. He took a breath. "I wasn't sure about coming tonight. Not because of you, but because the last wedding I went to was mine. It's been hard, carrying that grief. But being here with you, Claire, it's the first time I've felt alive again. Like I could be more than just Sophie's dad or a widower." Claire's eyes burned with tears. She hadn't known the depth of his pain, hadn't realized how much this night meant to him too. "Ethan, she faltered, overwhelmed. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know you've given me something too. You've reminded me what it's like to feel hopeful." The raw honesty in his voice broke her open. Tears spilled down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of connection. She squeezed his hand, and in that moment, the weight of her past, Michael, Lila, the betrayal, felt lighter. She wasn't alone anymore. The drive home was quiet, but not heavy. Sophie was asleep at the sitters, and Ethan invited Claire up for tea. They sat on his couch, talking until dawn about everything: grief, fear, dreams they'd buried. Claire realized she wasn't just healing from her breakup. She was opening her heart to something new. Ethan, too, felt a shift. He'd spent years focused on Sophie, convinced he'd never love again. But Claire's courage, her vulnerability, had cracked that belief wide open. The story didn't end with a kiss or a grand declaration. It ended with two people, bruised but hopeful, choosing to face the future together. Claire went to the wedding to prove she was okay, but she left with something better: the realization that she was enough, just as she was. And Ethan, who'd thought his heart was locked away forever, found it beating again. Months later, Claire and Ethan were still figuring things out. They took it slow, for Sophie's sake and their own. But every shared coffee, every laugh, every quiet moment felt like a step towards something real. Claire never heard from Michael or Lila again, and she didn't care. She'd reclaimed her story, not for them, but for herself.